Hello, hello, hello. So I saw this video by JimmyTheGiant, and JimmyTheGiant's a channel who makes documentaries. I've watched a few of them actually, they're pretty good and would recommend them. But I've seen this video by him now, How I Escaped the Alt-Right Pipeline, and I must say it's very disappointing. So as I was watching it, I thought that there is enough in this that I can actually make a video and make a few comments to hopefully debunk Jimmy and, ideally change his mind on a few things. If he actually sees this would be a miracle. I don't expect it to happen, but yeah, I think this is a good opportunity for me to perhaps explain a little bit about the different factions in the right and essentially give my view on who is and who isn't really worth watching. Because the impression I've got is Jimmy's been watching a lot of stuff that, really isn't the right sending its best. So anyway, without further ado, let's get into it. I should say, I'm going to fast forward anything where I'm not providing useful commentary, but I do suggest you watch the video for yourself and come to your own conclusions. Anyway.
So when I was young, I was just a sort of contrarian hipster. I'm not like a communist, but I'm definitely not a capitalist, and I'm definitely left-wing, and I definitely voted to remain in the EU referendum.
I don't blame you, mate. We've all made mistakes.
It was like a right-winger in the flesh. I'd never seen one before. I was like, what the fuck hell is this? Capitalism good? Welfare state bad? NHS bad?
Yeah, I think when I was probably about 13, maybe a bit later, I probably did watch a few Ben Shapiro videos, but if I'm totally honest, I've always found his voice annoying. That's why I haven't watched him more. I just can't get past the voice. And I don't like, the stereotypical Americans, so I just didn't watch him. I think a lot of people now who disagree with Ben Shapiro probably were watching him around this anti-SJW, 2016 era.
And when I say right wing, it's not, we don't like foreigners. It's stuff like this.
The people who get on welfare lose their human independence and feeling of dignity. They become subject to the dictates and whims of their welfare supervisor, who can tell them whether they can live here or there, whether they may put in a telephone, what they may do with their lives. They're treated like children.
So now
Yes, Milton Friedman's right here, completely, but I wouldn't necessarily call him right-wing. He's kind of one of the architects of, neoconservatism, or, the global American empire, or the gay as it's called. He's clearly not left-wing, but kind of in the same way Margaret Thatcher was. I don't think he cared too much for maintaining tradition and culture. But yeah, it's interesting to see with how warped people view the whole left-right spectrum, that these are the sort of people who are held up as, angels of the right, so to speak. Anyway.
How can I describe the fact that someone who was once a woman, and really still is, had her breasts cut off because she, he, they, their, them had fallen prey to a viciously harmful fad?
I know Jimmy's presenting this as going from, a reasonable point to quite an extreme point, but I think this is really a byproduct of modernity. I think if you look at any culture unaffected by wokeness, or any culture in the past, the first point would have been the extreme, the second point would have been the reasonable. So I guess that's a matter of perspective, and I'm not really making a solid point here, but interesting to observe. Jesus Christ, he's looking soy. No offense. Oh my god, what is that? That is funny.
Not academic. Jordan Peterson, to young Jimmy, sounded like how I imagine smart people sound. And he would, again, like my friend, he would talk about the benefits of capitalism. He would talk about natural hierarchies, and that it wasn't capitalism's fault for hierarchies, but hierarchies are natural. And so it's
That's true, by the way. Any attempt to destroy hierarchy has failed on a mass scale. In fact, one hilarious case is the number of Reddit anarchy communities that tend to find community leaders. Yeah, anyway.
Very interesting, because if you think about what Jordan Peterson is and what he thinks.
But yes, no, the right does believe that hierarchy is natural. And this is like one of the pillars of the left, is that they believe hierarchy is avoidable, when in fact we believe it isn't. And so just that small thing can change a lot of your approach to philosophy and ideology. What is this way to hold a phone, by the way? What is going on here? That is strange.
So whilst I'm going through Jordan Peterson's books, his podcasts, his speeches, etc., I'm getting this feeling that there's this sort of crazy, indoctrinated Marxist left who are trying to suppress your freedom and usher in communism. And so all this is...
Yeah, about that. I mean, the regime isn't so blatant about being Marxist, but I mean, yeah, to some extent they are more moderate than, you know, the USSR, but a lot of their ideas do come from the same ideas Marxism comes from. And a lot of it is just power politics. But I mean, but even beneath that, I said in my video, what is wokeness? It's intersectional neo-Marxism. And a lot of other people have called it LGBT race communism and stuff like this. Like, Jimmy doesn't state this explicitly, but he does imply that the idea that we're controlled by a woke, censorious mob is absurd. I wouldn't be so quick to dismiss that.
It's happening all the way in Canada where no one gives a fuck about. But what about here in Britain?
Love for the Canadians.
Britain, right? In Britain, we have a sort of similar scenario. And it involves a man, a very controversial man, by the name of Tommy Robinson. And so I come across Tommy Robinson in this period of time where he goes to jail for, as he's presenting it to the audience online, trying to report on Muslim grooming gangs. He goes to jail. And I see this as a suppression of journalism, a suppression of free speech by a tyrannical government. And so, yeah, I go to like a rally, like a free speech rally when Tommy Robinson's about to go to jail, and I come across Nico, and I see Nico, and I've...
Tommy Robinson, eh? He's not a man that I support myself. Undeniably, reporting on the grooming gangs is a good thing. It's an important thing, and it's not done enough in the mainstream, and it wasn't done before a ruckus was being made about it by the sorts of people you see here. Have I personally ever been a, Tommy fan, so to speak? No. Do I hold his opinions in high regard? No. But more to the point, Tommy's just a working class lad. He knows a good bit about Islam and this and that. But in terms of the informative sort of, evaluation of philosophy and history and stuff like this, I prefer to do on my channel. Tommy's not that. In fact, many on our side call this sort of lot counter-jihad, because it seems they'll accept quite a lot of stuff as long as it's not jihadi Muslims. And personally, I'm looking for a little bit more, serious stuff than this. But as for Jimmy, I think it's interesting to see he's taking the libertarian approach to Tommy and, saying he thought it's a matter of free speech. Like, to some extent it is, and definitely the regime persecutes the man when it needn't. But what I don't want is for normal people who may, consider themselves moderate or centrist or, slightly left-wing, to think that Tommy Robinson represents the genuine philosophical right wing in this country. He's a faction of it, for sure, but it's not just this. Anyway.
And then Nico does misrepresent me in the video, and he says that I went up to the police and told them to get rid of Nico.
The police... I do find it funny that in this video of Jimmy the Giant coming out as a left-wing libertarian, which he is, even he recognises that Nico Milano is nothing but a disingenuous hack. I frankly despise this man and the sort of people he represents. He's not here for serious discussion. He's just here to trick you, take advantage of you, make you look stupid. Oh no, I can't stand the man.
Then came over and surprise, he started crying to them as well.
When in reality, I was actually saying to the police that Nico has his free speech.
I just hate Nico Milano. God, he's so frustrating. He's not American, by the way. He's putting this accent on. God, I despise the man.
Now, from, the view I have now, I understand there are sort of two types of racism. There's like overt racism, which is like, I fucking hate migrants when you send them back, they're the worst. And then you have this kind of more like subconscious racism, or like
this is where I start to seriously disagree. I think there's only one type of racism, and that's in your heart racism. I think if you believe people are genetically inferior or, you know, irredeemably racially bad or what have you, I think that's racism, and anything else isn't. I mean, if you said X group is more violent than Y group because of culture, then I don't think that counts as racism. Racism has to be in the heart to be real. And if you're going to say that every criticism of an aspect of someone's culture is racism, then I don't think you're helping anyone. Like, if you can't say that the Scots and Irish of today are more advanced than the Scots of Irish of the 1500s, like, if you think that's racist to say, then frankly I've got no time for you, because that's complete nonsense. Anyway.
But what can happen from there is when you think you're like immune to racism, you sometimes are more susceptible to it in a way, but
What?
just a different type of racism. These grifters know they can't just say that, I don't know, black people are inferior genetically, although some of them have started doing that again. They've found sneakier.
Oh, please, do not say that when Farage is on screen. That is not something that Farage has ever said or believes. You know, this view of racism is the, you know, unconscious bias sort of, you know, woke shit version of racism. I could dedicate more time to combating this idea, but frankly, I just dismiss it out of hand. It's nonsense, and that's the end of it.
Ways of wrapping it, often by hiding behind culture. These pundits will lie and say stuff like 84% of grooming gangs are Asian Pakistani, which has been endlessly disproven. It is.
A think tank has claimed that 84% of convicted child grooming gang offences since 2005 were Asian. It said 222 of 264, or 84%, were Asian. British white men may tend to work individually. Asian men tend to do it in groups. However, researchers said their data sample size had been too small and more research needed to be conducted. This one said 75% of offenders were from Asian backgrounds, whilst 100% in nonce rings were white. I don't know what the difference is between a grooming gang and a pedo ring. I mean, potentially this data is, you know, inaccurate here and there, but this claim seems to be backed up somewhat. Yeah, I mean, this seems to me like a kind of cope way of saying that it didn't happen, when frankly we can see with our own eyes that it did. But then also, like, here we are.
Pakistani, which has been endlessly disproven. It is white people who make up the majority of grooming gangs. But
completely irrelevant fact. White people are the vast majority of this country, even still now. Like, per capita, look at this bit here. 36% of the victims identified their attackers as white, 27% as Asian, 16% as black, 16% as unspecified. Per capita, this is massively overrepresented here. Like, for Jimmy to say that it's debunked because, you know, the vast majority were white in a vast majority white country, like, frankly, this is very poor from him. Like, I do believe Jimmy to be an intellectually honest man with his heart in the right place, but at this point I'm starting to question his intelligence with the stats a little bit. You know, it's like the meme, understanding per capita, and it seems like he doesn't. Anyway.
All this misinformation can lead you to believe that their culture is inferior to ours, and therefore
it is.
We can't mix. And with the Tommy Robinson thing, it's
ethnically we can mix, of course. I'm not against interracial marriage, but culturally there are just things that are incompatible. Like, I'm happy to debate anyone on these points, but there are aspects of Sharia law and aspects of Islam that are incompatible with the West, and this shouldn't be controversial to say. Fundamentalist Islam has no place here, and it's not racist to say that.
It's kind of the same when it comes to Islam, right? You didn't hate people for being, like, having brown skin. You were simply critiquing their ideology, their beliefs.
Yes. I don't like the religion. Meanwhile, one of the best politicians, someone I hold in very high regard, is the leader of El Salvador, Mr. Bukele. He is a man of Arab descent, he's not Muslim, yet he is one of the best leaders there is. Like, I'm not racist against the man. I don't care if he's Arab or Chinese or or whatever. He's done a very good job, and I can appreciate that. That's the difference. It is religion, not race. And I think the framing otherwise is disingenuous.
So, you know, I'm listening to the greatest hits, right? I'm listening to Ben Shapiro debate some 12-year-old feminist.
Yeah, I don't like Ben Shapiro in the slightest, but this is what he does. He debates idiots, and then obviously he wins. But please do not think that this man, you know, represents the right in any meaningful way. He just represents, you know, his faction.
I'm listening to Jordan Peterson, Matt Walsh, I'm Joe Rogan till I fucking die. And I find myself accepting that I must be right-wing now. And, you know, we have a very warped view of what is right-wing and what isn't right-wing. A lot of these people are just, you know, classic centrists of the old world. It's just that everyone else is so bloody far left-wing that, you know, we've lost sense of what's normal. Even myself and the conservatism I espouse, in any normal time, this would be considered the sensible centre. And like when you're listening to all this stuff, you get this sort of impression of the left, like what you're perceiving the left to be like, basically the worst of the left.
You know what he's talking about here, it's slop. Yes, they cherry pick the worst examples and exaggerate that and make that out to be like a serious thing, and that's not actually what the regime believes. It's not what anyone in power values. It's just idiots online. It's slop. And so if you're paying any attention to that and coming away thinking that's what the left is or that's what the right's standing against, you're missing the picture entirely. Wouldn't pay much attention to it personally.
And so you just get pushed further and further right from more of a reactionary position rather than some actual ideological and maybe academic understanding of a
And that's the case here. Jimmy has come to the right not because of philosophy, not because of any reasoned position, but because he's seen the extreme cases of the left. And that's why I and plenty of other channels stand in opposition to that sort of slop content. We want to talk more about ideas, philosophy, history, meaningful stuff. Because people who came to the right the way Jimmy did, you know, they have no foundations. That's why they easily go back to the left. And I'm sure in the future he'll probably go back to the right again. But that's the problem. He has no conception of philosophy because he's been watching people with no conception of philosophy. Perhaps with the exception of Jordan Peterson. But even then it sounds like he got into Jordan Peterson off the woke stuff anyway, so... yeah.
But to be honest, like conservatives these days, it just seems to be mainly emotion.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the conservatives you're listening to, mate, we have a lot of data to back ourselves up, but perhaps you've just not been watching that sort of content.
Anyway, I find myself as a right-winger.
You never were, mate. To me, Jimmy seems like a liberal, a libertarian who holds the boomer truth regime principles in his heart. You know, I believe in equality, I believe in free speech, I believe in, you know, in this, that and the other, but with no real philosophical grounding. He holds assumptions that I think he should challenge, honestly. And if he comes back to the same opinions, so be it. But, you know, challenge your assumptions.
Believe in the typical sort of right-wing viewpoint that the state should be smaller, that people are responsible for themselves, and probably that like poor people are just lazy and they need to fix their own shit, and that billionaires and corporations are really good and like, you know, sort of, unless they're the ones that, I don't know, Russell Brand says is bad.
Yeah, to frame this as being right-wing, you know, this is just classical liberalism. That's not right-wing. Yes, most British conservatives would agree with this to a large extent. You should watch my video about America's lack of conservatism to understand the overlap between classical liberalism and conservatism, because, you know, classical liberalism is based on English values and conservatism in England is also based on English values. Or you can look at my video, Capitalism and Honest Reckoning. But, you know, the ideas he's talking about here, they're just classical liberal values. I don't believe this man was ever right-wing.
But just because I was so sort of libertarian right-wing that I didn't like the fact the government were telling me to do it. And like, I don't know, I'm here to...
Libertarians are not right-wing. Good God. the stuff they advocate for doesn't move things rightwards in any way. The best it could ever do is restore some sense of centrism or anarchy. I wouldn't personally call them right-wing, not in any meaningful way.
But whilst making the video and wanting to address the question, like, where did chavs go? Why did they disappear? I stumbled across a geezer called Owen Jones.
Oh my god. Owen Jones, the fucking communist. Oh, dearie me. Dearie me. Here you are, folks. You right-wing libertarians, easily won over by a man like Owen Jones. Oh, shameful. Look, I've not watched the video on chat, so I can't talk about it too much, but my sense is that it is cultural. In fact, I remember there being I think it was British Pathé video showing that, you know, the Cockney working class used to come out of their front doors and clean their front step and stuff like this. You know, the street looked kind of miserable, yet they still take care of it. They'd be house proud. Like, I cannot believe that, as Jimmy's about to claim, that, you know, the chav is the product of his socio-economic environment. I just cannot accept that claim, because many people in such a similar scenario don't behave the same way. Like, where are the chavs of Japan, for example? They just don't have them. It is a cultural phenomenon. This is another thing I noticed. Commonly, why is there a bloody Z? Why is there a Z? Like, this is meant to be a book written about Brits by a Brit. Why is there a Z? Bloody Americanisms everywhere.
Chavs were like a product of their environment and their economic status.
You know, it's the same kind of attitude. Like, if we built more skate parks, we'd stop the stabbings in London. It's just utterly naive. Utterly bullshit.
And the more I research into Thatcher and see how she completely flipped this country on its head, she completely radicalised Britain into being extreme neoliberal capitalists.
This is true, by the way. Many people, even on the apparent right, lionize Thatcher and lionize, you know, Thatcherism. But Thatcherism is like boomer neoliberalism. Yeah, Thatcher was good for the economy here and there, and undeniably brilliant in the Falkland Wars, although, you know, the budget cuts before then didn't help things. But fundamentally, like, I can redirect you to like a David Starkey video. Thatcher wasn't a small c conservative. She was just a neoliberal. Like, people on the right need to wise their ideas up, because this woman here, like, yes, she did a lot of good, but she also failed to do a lot, and is perhaps to a large extent responsible for where we've ended up culturally as we are now, and economically. I personally don't like Thatcher. I know many people don't like Thatcher who share my views. She's a flawed woman who failed in many fronts.
We weren't fucking insane capitalists that we are right now. I've discovered this. We followed a style of economics that was called Keynesianism.
God. Oh, Keynesianism is awful. Awful. Again, I can redirect you to, like, you know, videos about Keynesianism and, you know, why the modern monetary theory is bollocks and stuff like this, but just stupid. It's all just stupid.
The world was better back in like the 60s and 50s. And then I find out the reason why it was better was because we had mass public investment. Basically,
created a fucking generation of ungrateful boomers. God, it's awful.
All the while, I look on my phone at all the right-wingers talking about Ukraine, and they believe that Zelensky is like, I don't know, a blue-haired feminist or something.
I will stress this again. One of the greatest enemies of our nation.
Tim Pool's a moron. Why listen to him? He's a slop merchant. Like, Ukraine is not the enemy of the West, obviously. For those who don't know, the purpose of the Ukraine war from the American perspective is to, reinstate Russia as the big bad enemy of Europe and make the rest of NATO fall in line and, fall back into the American sphere and shut down ideas of EU army and Europeans trying to re-establish their own independence. That's what America's got out of this. But they've got that now, and now they don't care for Ukraine. But Ukraine is not the enemy of the West. Utterly insane idea. Like, Tim Pool's just nuts. Slop nuts. And anyway, he's gone now, so...
right now is Ukraine.
And they're trying to say that it's actually NATO, and NATO are the bad guys, and America's bad, even though we're pro-America. America is bad.
Well, America is bad.
And, I'm learning more about the Ukrainian conflict and all the history of how it came to be and why we defend them and why we can't allow Russia to just go and take over sovereign nations. And so you learn more and more.
I mean, this is again a tangent, but the idea that Russia's this big, bad, evil USSR, monolith, ridiculous. Russia can't even manage Ukraine. The idea that they're going to have tanks rolling into Paris, absurd, completely absurd. And yet America wants us to believe this because then we're reliant on them for defense because the European nations don't really want to spend the money themselves, which America is happy for them not to do because that means they're in the American orbit. A whole rabbit hole of power politics and how the world really works. But yeah, Russia's not this big bad enemy. They're frankly incompetent. I think we need to clap back about this idea right-wing libertarian. Libertarians are not right-wing. The sooner we can get them out of the right, I think the better. Empty container ideology, that's frankly what libertarianism is. It's absurd. And look, it must be said because, someone's going to complain if I don't say it. Andrew Tate is a bloody idiot. His ideas are insane, like warlord conqueror with his concubines. Like, I don't like the man at all. No small c conservative or even right-wing person should like the man. He's ridiculous.
And there was one bro who would go on these shows, and his name was Destiny.
Fucking Destiny. Fucking Destiny. God. Fucking. Oh, the man whose wife left him for the other guy that he let her sleep with. Jesus Christ. What a pathetic man. Absolute imbecile. Oh, Jesus. Fucking God. I know Jimmy the Giant's going to go on a rant saying how much he loves Destiny, but fuck, what a pathetic individual, by the way. Absolutely pathetic. And we've seen his recent meltdown since his wife left him. He's descended into the worst sort of, kill Trump degeneracy. Absolutely ridiculous, but fucking God.
Why? Is because they get the resource, they get the money, they get the children, they get put in a better situation financially.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
Dude, they get the house. Moms don't live good on child support.
I should probably let the idea play first before responding to it, but fuck it, I've paused now. Destiny's point here seems to be that men do better after a divorce financially than women. My response to this idea, sorry, it's a tangent again. Men typically do better economically than women, full stop. They're just more inclined to it. And women after a divorce, especially if they're the one left with the kids for most of the time, yes, they can't as easily go into a job, but measuring success by income versus by resources actually you spend and can use is absurd, and Destiny is completely wrong to do that. But at the same time, fundamentally, yes, a single man will do better economically than a married man with kids. But what a miserable life that would be. Frankly, as a small c conservative, I don't care too much about the economic side, so long as people are forming wholesome, happy relationships, raising kids, serving the national interest, building legacy, stuff like this. Like the fact that a single divorcee will do better than the divorced mum who has to look after the kids. To some extent, this seems obvious and irrelevant. Anyway, this is all just stupid arguments.
But he didn't play into like the left-wing woke crazy stereotype. He was just a normal dude who presented left-wing ideas but was
Normal dudes don't let other men shack their wife. God.
really good at debating. Now remember, debating the left up until this point was Ben Shapiro.
I don't even believe Destiny was really good at debating. I just think his opponents were really bad at debating. Like, standards have dropped massively across the board. Anyway.
Debating a 4-year-old. But now you're seeing someone who's actually quite well versed in the beliefs of the right wing, debating them and winning a lot. So I get into Destiny, right? And
Yeah, but I mean, debating Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro's an idiot. Andrew Neil, the supposed conservative, interviewed Ben Shapiro, a man who's supposed to be on the same political side of him, and Ben Shapiro scored an own goal in a disastrous interview by attacking Andrew Neil, who wasn't opposed to him, just was asking normal questions. Ben Shapiro's an idiot. Anyone with a brain could beat Ben Shapiro in a debate. The man's stupid and annoying to listen to.
Gary's economics.
You need to have structures in place in your economy that prevent the rich from taking all of the wealth. If you don't have that, history teaches us the rich get all of the wealth.
Inaccurate statement. You don't need structures in place to do this. This happens naturally. In fact, the record of history seems to show that if you don't have structures, then the middle class rises. And as we've introduced structures, the middle class has been, bashed back into the working class. I don't believe you need some sort of, tax policy interventionism to stop the rich from getting too rich. I think if you ask the Victorians of 1912, like, how much of the country was middle class and, wealth inequality back then, without these structures, I think it's probably better back then compared to now, where supposedly we're meant to have more structures to keep the rich down, when in fact we just keep the middle class down instead. I don't think this guy's analysis is right on this matter.
And once the rich have all of
his sentiment is right, we should have a middle class, but his method is wrong.
the wealth, ordinary people end up with very poor living conditions. If you go to countries that are very unequal, India, South Africa, almost anywhere in Latin America, very unequal societies lead to very poor living standards.
Gary is like a working class geezer, and he became super wealthy as a trader, and his whole thesis was that income inequality.
Yeah, you've even got the graph here. Wealth distribution in the UK, top 10%, bottom 50. If you put the lines on for when the Labour government comes in, it'd be around here, which slows the graph down, around here, which slows the graph down, around here, which actually reverses the graph, here again, which continues the same trend, and, the Tories of, like the Cameronite Tories, essentially Labour, the same thing, really. So, yeah, Labour government has not helped wealth distribution. That's what this graph tells you. Labour here, Labour here, Labour here. I mean, look at the facts.
Quality is going to get worse. And he betted on that. He made money predicting that, and it came to fruition. Income inequality has got much worse.
It's not a hard thing to predict that wealth distribution is going to get worse in the country. That's an obvious thing. Like, anyone can predict that.
The right wing really love to argue about culture. They always say that, like, it's people's... The problems in society comes from people's ideas and beliefs and their values.
Culture is important and explains the differences of why, in one place you can have the same conditions and yet a different outcome to another place with the same conditions. That's what culture can tell you.
Maybe it's because no one can fucking afford to have families. Maybe.
Again, this is something that's kind of not quite true. Like, I'd redirect you to the channel Kaiser Bauch. I'd probably struggle at this moment to find the exact video, but essentially he says that there is much more to the fertility crisis than, economics. It is cultural. It is a product of, people not wanting to give up their own luxuries as, a family without kids, and people are having kids later on in life, which then reduces their chance to have them and stuff like this. It is to a large extent cultural, and it's absurd to claim otherwise.
Maybe it's because most people in their 20s still haven't moved out of their parents' house. Maybe it's because they don't make enough money between two.
The economics obviously doesn't help at all. But yeah. At the same time, though, if you look way back in the past, typically you'd have one family all living under the same roof, like grandparents, parents, probably lots of siblings. Having a nuclear family with their own house is kind of a modern thing. So if you go back to, like the peasantry era of Europe, like medieval stuff, they were having more kids there, despite probably being in about a similar economic position. So it isn't just economics, it is cultural.
So I realised that I actually don't think everything is culture, and I think mainly things come from economics. I think most culture comes from...
It's obviously a mix, but you can't dismiss the cultural side. Nor should you focus exclusively on the cultural side. But anyway, I've made this point a few times now. Culture's important.
The woke stuff, yeah, it's annoying. Do we need to argue about if there's an egg in a salad emoji? Is that...
No, but that's just slop and we shouldn't pay attention to it.
If it spends more time on that than the cost of living, the housing crisis, rising inequality, things that, are actually important and actually affect your lives, if you're more focused on the former, then I hate to say it, but you've been bamboozled.
Yes, you have been. And he's talking to himself here, like, this is just irrelevant slop and he shouldn't be paying attention to it. I'm not the one getting distracted by useless woke shit. Neither should anyone else. Anyway.
And then now, lo and behold, 2024, we're in big economic problems, and it just so happens that the far right is on the rise, and the Tommy Robinson Farage followers are now throwing bricks at mosques.
Do not blame Farage for that. He had no involvement whatsoever. He was vehemently against the idea that you should go in the Southport riots. Completely unfair to, lump Farage in with those rioters. Completely unfair. Actually, for that matter, it's completely unfair to, put Tommy in with it as well, because Tommy was telling people not to do the riots. In fact, I don't even think he had his phone at the time. I think he'd been arrested or something. It's unfair.
I kind of realised, the argument should be about economics. The more I learn about the left and right economic theories, the more evidence that I can see that left-wing economics tends to result in better growth and prosperity.
What fucking evidence have you seen then? It's completely false. Absolute. They spend recklessly. Yes, momentarily people might get a bit more out of that, but the future is sacrificed. But go back further. Go back to the Victorian era. How many people were brought out of poverty by that? I can't see evidence that the left wing does better. Good God. The problem is we've not had proper conservative economics. I want to say, since possibly before the World Wars. So there's not really a good example to look at. But I mean, actually there is. Look at El Salvador. Look at Singapore. That's how it should be done. Look, good God, more evidence for the left. Jesus.
And there's a funny reason as to why I believe in these kind of left-wing values, and it ties back to my original right-wing ideology, is because of meritocracy.
Watch my video about, equality is a false virtue. Yes, it's unfair on paper that, some people are born wealthy or some people are born talented. But so it's unfair that some people are born beautiful and some people are born, fuck ugly. What are you going to do about that? That's how it is. Every attempt to change that has failed. Would it be lovely in principle that, everyone could be, equally wealthy and, all this? Yeah, sure, but it's not reality. Hierarchy is inevitable and unavoidable. Just how the world works. I mean, to an extent, maybe there's a point there, but, the merchant class of this country are often wealthier than the aristocracy class of this country. Like, how's that for meritocracy? Yes, those in power want to keep out, outsiders, for lack of a better word, though sometimes they've let them in the past. Stuff like grammar schools was a brilliant way to get people who are economically disadvantaged into, very good educations. But for the most part, you go back to the old Victorian system and meritocracy was alive and kicking, Like, this idea that the right doesn't have meritocracy because it has, like, noble hierarchy, it's just not true. Also, watch my video about In Defense of Aristocracy or more of this. That's where I square the ideas of meritocracy and nobility. But it's just not true.
But the right wing, through a very concerted effort, has brainwashed most of society to believe that this is inevitable. We can't fix this. There's nothing we can do about this. But we know we can. We have in the past. Countries do right now. And so that is where I land. If it means that
I wish you would have said which. I wish you would have said which, because then I could have had, responded to it. But the right is not trying to convince you that meritocracy is impossible. Absolutely absurd claim. I don't know where he's got the idea from. Probably off some degenerate like Owen Jones. Oh, fucking who knows. But, dearie me.
I now have to wear a badge to show I'm part of the woke brigade. So be it. I've accepted that through actually delving into this stuff.
I know that's a flippant comment, just for the video, but woke doesn't mean... Like, woke has a specific meaning. It's intersectional neo-Marxism. You can't stop using terms willy-nilly as though they have no meaning whatsoever. Doesn't do anyone any good.
Looking into social economic problems, reading papers from academics, not listening to Jordan Peterson tell me that the academia world is overrun by Marxists. I've learned some stuff and I've challenged.
But it is. It is. God. Oh, dearie me. It is. You can find graphs of, I know it's not a great example, but Republicans versus Democrats in academia, and they shift very much towards being overwhelmingly Democrat. And a lot of the ideas of the left, Marxist ideas in their origin, are what's espoused by the left, Like, don't dismiss the idea because you personally find it incredulous. Dearie me.
My way of viewing the world and had to challenge my ego at the same time. So I want to know you guys' evolution. Like, have you always believed in what you believe? Has it ever changed? What changed it? So drop that in the comments below. Join the Discord. I'll catch you in the next one.
Okay, so let me summarize this all. To me, it seems that Jimmy the Giant, who, he's a decent bloke, he's made a lot of good documentaries, he has not ever been right-wing. He's always been libertarian. And, I view libertarianism as empty container ideology. There's no content to it. It's just neutral principles like free speech and, I want prosperity. It seems to me that Jimmy has no grounding in genuine conservative philosophy, no understanding of constitutional matters, poor understanding of economics, poor understanding of, how power works, what it does, why it does what it does. Like, to an extent, politically speaking and economically speaking, he is an idiot in the sense that he doesn't understand the philosophy. Like, I don't mean that as an insult to intelligence per se, but rather it is the term for someone who just ignorant, I suppose, is the other word for it. Completely ignorant of philosophy, economics, all these things. And the problem is there are probably many people like him who, you get this caricature view of the right of, it's people like Ben Shapiro and Andrew Tate and all nutters like that. Piers Morgan, get out. Like, that's insane. But many people probably believe the same thing and then think, oh, well, the left seems to want to combat these ideas. Maybe at one point they did, but they don't now. Labour does not stand for the working class in any way. Like, you go back to his graph of wealth inequality. I plotted, here's a Labour government, here's a Labour government, here's a Labour government. Never helped. And whenever it's not the Labour government, wealth inequality improved, until recently at least. Like, a lot of the stuff he said, I mean, especially like, you know, the majority of grooming gangs are white, which is, number one, it isn't true, but number two, per capita, mate, that's what's more important. There's just a lot that this guy doesn't understand. However, saying that, I think, you know, his heart's in the right place. What I'm trying to say is he can probably be converted again to a more sensible position if only he researched, you know, the stuff I've researched, the stuff that people on my side have read and observed, and if he had the facts that we have and stuff like this. It's just that he hasn't done so. He's completely ignorant of it. So I don't wish to disparage the guy too much, you know. Check him out. A lot of his documentaries are actually quite good, insightful, you know, areas I wouldn't have looked at myself. So, you know, check him out. If he wanted to respond, you know, that'd be amazing. Or if he wanted to, you know, debate the matter, I'd also be up for that. I doubt it's going to happen for a channel as small as mine, but, you know, I'd be up for it. Anyway, so I think that's that. I think I've said my piece. If you found my insight useful, I've got plenty more videos talking about philosophy, economics, history, whatever. If you want to support me, I've got a buy me a coffee page. You know, you can give me a $5 or more, easy peasy. If you liked it, then, you know, share the video. Other than that, then like, subscribe, and God save the king.